my own view was that what we wanted was to replicate what happened in 1955. I'm very old, but I wasn't around then. 1955, the Austrians decided autonomously that they wanted to be perpetually neutral. They didn't want to join anybody's alliance. Their decision was ratified by the four powers who were occupying Austria at the time: the Americans, the French, the British, and the Russians. And within 3 months, the Russians withdrew all 150,000 troops from Austria, and Austria was never threatened by the Warsaw Pact in the years that followed. I think it would be a rather sound relationship with Russia to have a neutral state in between the alliance and the Russians.
Do you think the time is now to effectively force Zelensky and Ukraine to the negotiating table?
Well, I would rather that the Ukrainians were doing better on the ground when negotiations start. I think we, the West, have been slow to supply them with the kind of kit they needed, and have retained for too long restrictions on how they use it. I'm also a little bit worried that we could be at a 1938 moment. When Chamberlain went to Munich, it was to save Czechoslovakia. He agreed to a partition of Czechoslovakia and gave up half of it. Hitler said that was it. He would settle for that, fine. And in 6 months' time, he took the other half. It seems to me that if there's a settlement which involves the Russians retaining Donetsk and Luhansk, then the chances are they'll come back in due course for more. As Putin has made pretty clear. I mean, Putin, who originally was in favor of a relationship between Russia and an independent Ukraine, provided that Ukraine did not join NATO, didn't mind about it joining the EU. He has since developed a doctrine about Ukraine being an illegitimate state, no right to national sovereignty, run by neo-Nazis, and needing to be restored to the Russian homeland. I suspect that that's what he really believes. And therefore, I suspect that any partition of Ukraine would be short-lived. So I'm all in favor of negotiations. The degree of death, of destruction in this war is appalling, very, very heavy, and it's gone on for 2 years. I'm all in favor of an armistice negotiations and a peace settlement, but not if it involves the partition of Ukraine.
And if we take your 1938 analogy, are we in this country deluding ourselves not just on the idea of establishing some kind of permanent settlement, but also on the amount which we need to spend on our own security and armed forces?
Yes, I think so, Adam. I mean, when the Labour government came in '97, we were spending about 4% of GDP on defence. We had been spending about 5% when John Major came in. We're now spending 2.2, 2.3%, and we're having a political discussion about whether and when we should move to 2.5% of GDP. This is out of scale. We lived off the peace dividend for too long. We didn't understand Mr. Putin when he first came in. We hoped for a relationship between Russia and NATO. Yeltsin, after all, signed a treaty with NATO, the founding act in '98. We have a different Russia now, an irredentist Russia, which is an existential threat to European security. The frontline states, those closest to Russia in NATO, are well aware of that. The Poles are spending 4% of GDP in defense and increasing it steeply. The Baltic states, the Greeks, they're all spending far more than we are as a proportion of GDP. I think it's good that the Labour government have said they want to increase defence expenditure. I think it's very good that they've set up a defence review under George Robertson, who is as an ex-Secretary General of NATO, knows these dossiers, as well as Defence Secretary, knows these dossiers very, very well. But I think we're in a fool's paradise if we think that 2.5% of GDP will do the job. We have hollowed out armed forces. We spend on the military a quarter of what we spend on the National Health Service. I think we are going to have to wake up, smell the coffee, and realize that our front line, the front line of our defense, is the eastern frontier of NATO and President Zelensky's heroic resistance in Ukraine. I do think that among the priorities for any government has to be the first task of government, which is to ensure the security of the people.
What would you say to former Chief of Defence Staff General Richards, who simply says, look, in the end, Ukraine has never been a strategic priority for the United Kingdom, and therefore, in a sense, he implies that we're throwing good money and good resources like long-range missiles after bad?
Well, I disagree with him. I think that the strategic priority for the United Kingdom is retaining independent West European countries. I think that the Finns and the Swedes, when they decided to join NATO in reaction to Putin's invasion of Ukraine, were recognizing a reality. I myself thought it was a mistake that we offered Ukraine membership of NATO. I thought that was rather provocative to Russians. My own 10 years ago, 15 years ago, my own view was that what we wanted was to replicate what happened in 1955. I'm very old, but I wasn't around then. 1955, the Austrians decided autonomously that they wanted to be perpetually neutral. They didn't want to join anybody's alliance. Their decision was ratified by the four powers who were occupying Austria at the time: the Americans, the French, the British, and the Russians. And within 3 months, the Russians withdrew all 150,000 troops from Austria, and Austria was never threatened by the Warsaw Pact in the years that followed. I think it would be a rather sound relationship with Russia to have a neutral state in between the alliance and the Russians. And that was the position that I was in. But it's very difficult now, after they've lost so many people, after there have been so many atrocities. Remember Bucha. It's very hard to tell the Ukrainians that they are not entitled to Western security guarantees. So if there were to be a peace settlement between the West and the Ukraine, which involved, as I trust it would, an independent Ukraine retaining its national sovereignty, then very strong security guarantees would have to be given. And we would have to mean them this time. We did give security guarantees to Ukraine when they gave up all their nuclear weapons in 1994. We gave them security guarantees, and so, of course, did the Russians. And the Russians have torn them up. And we have to remember that precedent, and we have to make sure that we're not conned again by Russia.
And I know you say Ukraine is the focus, but obviously there are very major developments taking place in Syria. Donald Trump, however, has said Syria is a mess. It's not our friend. The United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. Do you think that with a clean conscience, the UK can say the same thing?
Well, I don't know very much about Mr. Jalani, whose forces have reached Damascus. I do know that President Assad was a butcher who murdered a huge number of people who maintained chemical weapons and used them. I can't mourn him. I don't know what is going to emerge in Syria, but I don't think the fall of Assad is bad news.
The question I was really asking is looking at British foreign policy, whether we bear any responsibility for the chaos that's been there.
In Syria, no, I don't think so. I think we bear considerable responsibility for the situation in Iraq, obviously, and some for the situation in Afghanistan. Some, if you go back far enough, for the situation in Iran. But Syria, we were never the colonial power in Syria, and I don't think we bear a lot of responsibility for the situation there now. David Cameron wanted to act against Assad, wanted to bomb Damascus, and the House of Commons said no. And the House of Lords, I also said no, not the House of Lords matters very much. The David Cameron said, I hear you, and we did not, and therefore neither did our ally Obama at the time. Maybe that was a mistake, but I'd say it was a good mistake because I don't think we knew what we were going to do next if we had bombed Damascus, and I'm very glad we didn't.
Lord Kerr, thank you very much indeed for joining us this Sunday.